Now, New York's educated classes, the good government reform movement types, recoiled at this coincidental enrichment of Tammany politicians with the development of the city. In particular, this group was made up of what they call high church Protestants, WASPs, or the so-called episcopacy, who made their homes on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and sent their sons to boarding schools and Ivy League colleges. It wasn't just the blue-collar ashmen of Flushing Meadows that these educated classes like F. Scott Fitzgerald had so much disdain for. It was their political leaders. Why is it, the idealistic young Princetonian Amory Blaine asks in Scott Fitzgerald's This Side of Paradise, that the pick of the young Englishmen from Oxford and Cambridge go into politics, and in the USA, we leave it to the muckers, raised in the ward, educated in the assembly, and sent to Congress. Fat-paunched bundles of corruption, devoid of both ideas and ideals, as the debaters used to say. Now, it's not that the episcopacy was opposed to making money, but they had very definite ideas about what was a dignified or undignified way of making it. At the risk of simplification, working your way up from being a laborer to owning a construction company, using that company to support Tammany and maybe push a few city contracts your way, that was deeply undignified. Being a partner in a real estate law firm that did litigation work for one of those very same construction companies, on the other hand, pretty respectable. Going to Columbia Law School, working for a fancy white shoe law firm, and keeping Wall Street bankers from getting insider trading indictments thrown against them, that was very respectable. In theory, the violence and addiction and exploitation of the Chinese opium trade that was destroying millions of Chinese lives around these times would have been undignified, if anyone looked very closely. But of course, that was happening thousands of miles away. So working for a few years in a Hong Kong trading house, then returning with an opium-based fortune to build a Fifth Avenue mansion was actually considered quite dignified. And it was especially dignified if it meant your descendants were so rich that they could ignore where all that inherited drug money came from and virtue wash it through charity work, Ivy League college donations, opera galas, and good government reform movements. Things aren't much different today. Being a millionaire drug dealer, not respectable. But if you're doing it as the manufacturer of, say, an opioid fortune, well, that's a little different, especially if you can give all that money to all those colleges and all those art museums.